On July 22, 1879, somewhere between the Rocky Mountains and the town of Tombstone, Arizona, a 19-year-old young man named Jack, who was on the run from authorities, came across something horrific. What he witnessed over the next several days was unbelievable. When Jack was captured the following year, he told his story of what happened during those few days to Deputy Sheriff Garcia. Garcia had one of his men write down the accounts Jack told them. Garcia and his men followed up and investigated what Jack told them, and what they found left them dumbfounded. Amongst the men who heard the story firsthand, it became known as the Carnage of Tucson. This is Jack's story. Some of the account has been put into modern-day English. I'd been on the run since June of last year, going from place to place, when I decided to head to the Rocky Mountains and stay for a spell. I was going to put the cut on some elk that were living up high, and I'd also be able to relax for a while without having much fear of being captured. It was mid-morning, as I was making my way up the mountain, and caught sight of pieces of clothing down in a deep gulch to my right. I stopped my horse and pondered whether or not I should make my way down there, as it wouldn't be an easy ride. But the more I looked, the more items started to appear. I was hungry and didn't have much with me, so I decided to go down there to see if there was anything worth taking, and possibly some food. I was also thirsty and needed to fill my canteen, and there was most likely a stream down there. I'm not sure how long it took me to get down there, but it was a while. As the pieces of clothing came into sight, I noticed just up the hill there was an overturned wagon behind a large tree with items scattered about. This was good, I thought. I'd most likely find some food and other items worth taking. I decided to head straight to the wagon first. As I did, I drew my pistol, cocking the hammer back. I'm not stupid and knew there could still be people about. I'm also a wanted man and knew someone might recognize me. As I got within spitting distance, my jaw dropped as I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. Just behind the wagon were the naked bodies of 12 people, men, women, and children. They were neatly lined up in a row, one next to each other. What was odd, though, was the fact that the bodies had several circular holes in them, the size of glass jars. Some of them had holes through their face, which was an ungodly sight to witness, as I could see the insides of their heads. I sat there for a spell, trying to think of what could have made such perfectly formed holes in them. Nothing I knew of. The only possible thing that came to my mind would be balls from cannon, but I've seen what they do to a body, and this was not that. These holes were too neat and precise. I finally got off my horse and decided to have a closer look. I wasn't scared up to that point until I started sliding my leg over the saddle and my feet touched the ground. Sitting high on a horse gives you confidence and a better view of what's around you. I looked all around me to make sure no one else was around that might do me harm before walking over to the bodies. As I walked up to within touching distance of the closest body, the ungodly smell of decaying flesh hit me, and I started vomiting. As I turned to look back at the bodies, I could see they were starting to rot, and the insides of the wounds were covered in maggots. They've been here for a few days at least, or longer, I thought. I covered my nose and mouth with my handkerchief as I knelt down to take a closer look to see what might have been the cause of their death. Again, the circular wounds were too perfect to be made by cannonballs or even by someone with a knife. I was baffled and scared. As I stood up right then, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the uneasy feeling I was being watched. I raised my pistol as I turned around to see if someone was behind me. As I did, I swear to God, I saw something swiftly move back into the trees a ways up behind me. I saw just enough to know it wasn't any animal I've ever seen, but I can't explain what it was. My pistol hand clenched in fear as I fired off a round in the direction of the movement. I almost jumped out of my skin as the round went off, as I wasn't prepared for that. I then yelled out, "Who's there? Show yourself. Don't make me come up there." I stood there trembling in fear, trying to act brave when in fact I was as scared as a newborn chick. I knew I needed to go see what the movement was to be sure, but I also know a thing or two about self-preservation. I knew whatever it might be the same thing that killed those folk. I stood there, pistol in hand, staring up at that hill for the longest time, waiting to see if whatever it was might show itself. Just when my legs were about to buckle and give out, I decided I needed to inspect the wagon for any essentials that might be of use to me, then get the hell out of there. I slowly backed up to the overturned wagon. As I peered inside the wagon, I kept my pistol up at the ready and continued looking behind me. There was a good amount of dried food and supplies in the wagon, so I quickly grabbed and loaded what I could fit into my saddlebags, all while being cautious of my surroundings. I then mounted my horse and went down to the bottom of the gulch to get some water. When I made it down to the stream, I was taken aback to see a bed of rocks. The stream was covered in what appeared to be blood, with a pool of blood still on one of the larger rocks. It looked fairly fresh. My head was immediately on a swivel. The area was thick with bushes and trees, and if something decided to come at me, I wouldn't have much time to react. The thought of just getting the hell out of there crossed my mind, but I badly needed water as it had been a day or two since I had any, and it'd be a spell before I'd come across it again. As I stepped down off my horse, I heard someone in a soft voice somewhere behind me say, "Mister, help me." Without thinking, I quickly drew my pistol and turned towards the direction of the voice. As I noticed my pistol hand was trembling something awful, I stood there looking towards where I thought the voice came from. I saw the tall, thick bushes in front of me, moving like something was coming at me. Cocked the hammer back and readied myself for anything to happen. Whatever it was stopped right at the edge of the bushes before exposing itself. I then called out, "Who are you? Show yourself." A few minutes went by as I stood there with nothing happening. Suddenly, without warning, whatever it was turned around and ran back the way it had come. It scared me some, and I almost fired off another round but was able to stop myself from pulling the trigger in the nick of time. I thought I'd seen some strange things, but nothing like what I was witnessing. I started thinking about what it could possibly be. If it was a person, why would it run from me? I thought, could it be an animal? Animals don't talk though. I contemplated following it through the bushes, but decided it was too thick and it wasn't worth it. At that point, I just wanted to get water and get out of there as quickly as I could. I didn't want to end up like the bodies I'd found. Put my pistol back into its holster, grabbed my canteen, and quickly filled it up. All the while, I kept a watchful eye on my surroundings. Predator's best time to attack is at a watering hole when its prey is busy, and I knew this well. As I mounted my horse, I decided to head back up the hill to where I'd originally been headed. It was more open up there, which meant it'd be hard for something to sneak up on me without me seeing it first. Nothing eventful happened the rest of the day, and after riding for several hours and getting some distance between me and that gulch, I decided to settle down for the night. I picked a spot at the base of some cliffs so nothing could sneak up behind me. I was always hesitant to make a fire while being on the run, but I was starving and needed to eat, which meant I'd have to cook. I built a fire just big enough to be able to cook some of the dried goods I'd gotten from the wagon. After dinner, I realized how exhausted I was and quickly fell asleep. I vividly remember the dream I was having. I was back in the gulch, and I was laying down on the blood-covered rocks with my horse standing over me. My horse then put her nose to my face, and I could feel her hot, humid breath as she breathed on me. This went on for a while before I slowly started waking up from my slumber, only to realize there was, in fact, something standing over me, inches away, breathing on my face. When my eyes adjusted enough, I could see the thing's outline against the stars, and quickly realized it was not my horse or any animal I'd ever seen. I reached for my pistol, which was still in its holster attached to my hip, and as I did, whatever it was took off in a flash without making a single sound. I jumped up as I drew my pistol, trying to see what I could in the darkness. As I turned around in a circle many times, I could see nothing but my horse, and she was still tied up about 20 feet away from me. There was no way it was her breathing on me. I grabbed a bunch more wood and built the fire up as high as I could. I didn't care at that point if anyone saw it. That was the most scared I've ever been in my life. I sat next to the fire the rest of the night, making sure it didn't go out, never going to sleep again. When morning came, I took a few hours nap before moving on, as my head ached from not sleeping. When I awoke, I cooked breakfast and contemplated where I should go next. The thought crossed my mind to head back to town. The thought of getting arrested and hung outweighed whatever it was that visited me during the night. I decided to press on until I found the elk in their summer grounds. I was in dire need of meat, and elk meat sure sounded good at the moment. I knew I still had half a day's ride before I'd hit their summer grounds, and hoped that was far enough away that the thing wouldn't follow me. I spent the day in fear as I rode along. Couldn't stop from looking all around me and jumping at every little sound. As I came to the top of a hill, which overlooked a small green valley, I saw a herd of elk grazing along. Right then, fear I'd been feeling left, and I forgot everything that had happened as the excitement of putting the stock on some elk took over. I quickly dismounted and grabbed my rifle out of its scabbard. I tied my horse to a tree and started stalking the elk through the trees. All I needed was one elk, and I'd have enough meat for quite some time. Luckily, the wagon had a good-sized bag of salt that I had grabbed, so I could preserve the meat, which meant I could stay in the mountains for a spell. It didn't take me long to put down a good-sized bull, the elk being undisturbed and not spooky. I spent the rest of the day cutting and processing the elk meat. Elk are huge animals, and I had a lot of meat, so I wasn't going to go very far, though I made camp fairly close to where I'd killed the elk. I planned on staying in that spot for a time and didn't really know when I was going to leave. I'd almost forgotten about what had taken place the previous days, which was a good thing. Nothing happened that night, and I actually slept better than I had since I had escaped from jail. When I woke up, my first thought was I needed water. I knew there was a river just over the hill from me, so the first thing I did was go fetch some water. As I made my way back to camp after getting water and it came into sight, I couldn't shake the feeling something was watching me. I slowly and cautiously approached as I kept an eye on my horse, who was tied to a tree. If something was amiss, she'd be the first to alarm me. She didn't seem alarmed, so it helped ease my suspicion. I spent the rest of the day salting and hanging the meat to dry. This didn't stop me from looking over my shoulder at the slightest twig snapping or leaves rustling, though. When nightfall came, I again decided to build a big fire that would hopefully burn all night. I was extremely tired from processing the elk over the last 2 days and knew I'd have a hard time staying awake during the night. I sat there staring into the fire, taking in its warmth, and that's the last thing I remember before hearing the soft voice behind me say, "Mister, help me." My first thought was, oh hell, I fell asleep. Something then grabbed the collar of my shirt from behind me and sent me flying through the air. I hit a pine tree, then started falling as I hit the branches on the way down. As I laid there on the ground, wriggling in pain, I heard the horrific screams of my horse. It took a bit before I was able to stand up. All the while she screamed out. I'd never heard a horse scream like that before. It was hideous. Once I was able to stand, I took off running in the opposite direction. I wasn't even sure which way I was running, but I happened to run straight to the river that was just beyond the hill from my camp. Once I hit the river, I followed it along, going up and away from my camp. I ran and ran until I fell down from exhaustion and passed out. When I came to, the sun was hitting me and several flies were staking claim on my face. As I sat up, I could feel sharp pain go through my back and could feel just how sore I was. My entire body ached with pain. I remember staring at the river for the longest time, replaying the events from the night before. I had some decisions to make. Walking back down to town would take a long time, but I also dreaded going back to camp. And judging by the screams my horse made, I had my doubts she'd still be alive. Curiosity got the best of me, and I made the decision to go back to camp. I had to follow the river back down a ways, so it would give me some time to think if I decided to change my mind. Once I made it to the spot where I needed to leave the river and head straight to camp, I took a deep breath and said aloud, "All right, Jack, don't be yellow." I then started walking towards my camp. As I climbed the hill that overlooked my camp, as I made it to the top of the hill, I quickly began scanning the area. I could make out bits and pieces of my camp but couldn't clearly see everything. I was scared to death as I continued walking towards it. When I got close enough to see everything, I said aloud, "What in the name of God happened here?" My horse's head had been cut off and was gone, was nowhere I could see. What scared me the most, though, were the circular holes through her body, just like the ones I'd seen in the folks down in the Gulch. I walked over to her body and knelt down to get a closer look. When, to my shock and amazement, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There, in the moist dirt, were the footprints of what appeared to be a small child. What puzzled me, though, was just in front of the toes were the impressions of what looked like talons. Whatever made the footprints had fairly large talons attached to its toes. This scared the bejesus out of me, and I quickly stood up, looking all around me, praying whatever made the footprints wasn't going to make me its next victim. I made the immediate decision to gather what I could carry and get the hell out of there. It then took me several days before I made it down to Tombstone. Once Tombstone came into sight, I waited until dark before going in, dealing a horse, and making my way to Bisbee. I know you don't believe me, but I urge you to go to the Gulch and see for yourselves. The bones of the settlers must surely still be there. Then you'll see I'm not lying. A few days later, with directions to the Gulch given to them by Jack, Garcia and some of his men made their way there. Just as Jack said, the wagon was there, along with the bones and remnants of what was left of the settlers. Garcia and his men verified the bones did, in fact, have perfectly cut circular holes through their rib cages, sternums, and skulls. They buried what was left of them, but a few of the bones, along with one skull, were brought back to the town of Tombstone and were passed down from generation to generation through Sheriff Garcia's family. Only a few people living today have actually seen the skull and bones with their own eyes. For more chilling horror stories, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.